This is your 1632 discussion of clothing, costuming, and cosplay, which are to some extent three different concepts, but we will mention at least all of them. There are various ways to approach historical dress. I am a member of the 16th and 17th century clothing group on Facebook. This is a group largely European in membership, many of whom are professionally trained tailors, many of whom are museum employees, textile conservators, the kind of people who are brought the stuff that is in a sunken ship and given to them to bring back to life. And they are very meticulous in what they regard as historical clothing. You find examples of that also in the United States. My late husband was very active in the DC Revolutionary Roundtable. Many of these military officers, for their revolutionary uniforms, well, one of them went to the point of buying wool from a specific breed of heirloom sheep that was being still found somewhere in Scotland, and having the thread hand spun, and then having his fabric hand woven, and sewing it every stitch by himself with linen thread. Hooray for him, but the average person is not going to put that much into it. My friend Susan was a volunteer at Gadsby's Cavern for decades, and as she said, she couldn't afford to be anything more than a kitchen maid. That she was a school teacher, she had a limited amount of money to spend on what she had, and she was wearing homespun, and she was wearing a bodice stiffened with straw, and no way could she go into expensive upper class clothing from that kind of thing. So there is that kind of historical costuming recreation. And then there is entertaining costume recreation, in which basically you attempt to give a visual impression of the period in which you are putting yourself. You can combine a peasant blouse with a drawstring. You can replace the elastic with a drawstring. If you're in the mood, you can make a bodice, you can make a full gathered skirt, and for many occasions that will suffice. The third is where you have your historical clash between the uptimers and the downtimers, in which hybrid costuming is developing, and much of it will be by word of mouth and hearsay. And we are going to introduce Bethanne, Kim, and the Skort.
It's a Skort. I wanted to do this because when I've been to cons, and I haven't admittedly been to that many, I see a lot of cosplay, but I don't see as a lot of alternate history cosplay. So we have a third person joining us, and I don't know, you'll get to introduce yourself in a minute. So this isn't necessarily just 1632. I think that alternate history cosplay should be a thing, and it's a lot of fun. So like what I'm wearing, I have this skirt I'm wearing, which is a split skirt, technically, and in the 1632 universe, that's what women wore a lot. I had a different one I wore yesterday, and I'll just go ahead and show you this right now. This is like the simplest pattern on the planet. It rivals the one to make a pillowcase. This is the fold. You cut a crotch. You cut straight across the top, you cut straight across the bottom. You have two pieces of fabric. You sew them along the crotch, and then you put some kind of waist, and you hem the bottom. You may want to sew the sides together, or not. You may hem them, or or you can just use the salvage. Seriously, rivals the pillowcase. The one I'm wearing right now, I sewed the sides, and I have ties at the top.
But does it have pockets?
But, well, no, because it's historical. What it has is a space here, and I didn't do it because I ran out of time this week, but historically, the pocket was a separate thing. And so I will have a pocket in the middle that you can reach, because it's a cosplay.
Is it like a pouch?
It is. I have a book here that I can show you guys. The pocket. So, that's the thing. And I made another one yesterday that I wore yesterday where I didn't sew the sides because I used the salvage and I just had elastic front and back. And in the front where you could see it, I covered it up a little bit, although, well, honestly, 'cause I just don't want elastic showing. But the downtimers would have really liked to have the elastic shown off because it's expensive, right? So when you're looking at something from a cosplay point of view, there may be something that you wouldn't do normally, that like the downtimers would view this as so expensive. So they would show it off.
Excuse me. And this might not be a good question, but Mark, could you at some point talk about when elastic could be produced downtime?
Yeah, we can talk about that. And
Well, basically, it will be probably for a long time not a priority in the advancing technology, because there are better things, or more necessary things to be doing with latex, which you need for elastic. Unless there turns out to be a major need by the USC Army for elastic for some reason.
And then when the war is over, they need to do something.
But you can do basically pretty much anything with a drawstring that you can do with elastic if you're willing to put up with it. And in, something honest, elastic eventually succumbs to elastic fatigue, and your underpants fall off. Your half slips fall off, and you hold them.
But a drawstring doesn't
Look at it, and you say, either I'm going to drop this in the garbage, or I'm going to put a drawstring in the top. Because there isn't going to be any replacement. So in the early book where Henry Drayson gives knee socks to Grandma Richter as part of his,
tied up.
yes, probably by 1637 she's putting garters on them, keeping them up, because sock elastic doesn't last all that long, and it's particularly not going to last very long when it's being washed with downtown line soap, which is what they still have, because that is what the Zeithensiedereien of Germany produced, large quantities of old-fashioned lye soap. My good back full. So many people, nobody had soap. They sure did have soap. Zeithensiedereien were in every town.
Can I help answer this before I introduce you? Can I help answer this? They used to use in Europe latex from dandelion stems. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, you don't have to have it from a rubber plant in South America. It was local.
they're going to be even more upset about the way they treat dandelions now. I have a line in one where woman's like out of her mind about how much Americans hate dandelions.
I don't know how I ended up on this panel because they didn't ask, but I do have an area of expertise. My stepdaughter is a master costumer. Okay? She was the guest of honor at the Twilight Convention in Australia because she could replicate all of the outfits that were in that series. If you've ever seen the funny mockeries of the Lord of the Rings and Bilbo and all that were done with music, she did all the costumes for us. And she did them in my living room, and we got talking about it because I'm more of an observer than a sewer. I mean, I have a sewing machine, and my husband does machines, so I do the hand sewing, and he does the machine. That's just the division of labor in my house. But It's just for a one-shot deal. I hate to say it, but her, she would make the things for these funny videos. For example, Ron Beasley's sweater for one of these videos. It was put together with staples, duct tape, and glue, and was good for one usage. The stuff that she makes for herself, which is just astounding. I wish I had lost these photos. I could get them back from her. They're just absolutely amazing. What you can do to get fabric for some of these things, she would go down to the local thrift store, and she would get everything from beat-up old leather coats to prom dresses, and we would just have yards and yards and yards of inexpensive fabric.
Okay, also for fabric, those of you who remember Kevin and Karen Evans, Karen came in costume to many of the mini-cons before they passed on, and she had made herself a 17th century dress which gave the impression of brocade. When you looked at it, it looked like silver embroidery. It was upholstery fabric modeled on the wedding suit of Gustav Adolf. It was an upholstery fabric for luxury clothing in the 17th century period. That's where you go.
A friend of mine who was also a dancer as I am was in the DuPont Circle Consortium doing the gatherings and all of that. And definitely her Tudor dress is upholstery fabric. And one thing about upholstery fabric, it's wider. So you get more out of it.
Well, I never
in
gave
some
my
ways, if you're trying to
Yeah,
do
no, no, Virginia, I think we
I
can
never
do
gave my
that.
name. I'm the editor of this Makes magazine. Hello, my name is Wendy. And you can go ahead and continue. I didn't want to interrupt that. I just realized I got the time.
I haven't forgotten what I was going to say.
But you were talking about upholstery fabric.
Yes, upholstery fabric, if you want an authentic cut, actually the width tempts you to do it wrong because downtown fabric was fairly narrow,
yeah.
and you had two doors.
That was one of the advantages that my stepdaughter had. She would bring her fabrics for about 20 years and just get all the remnants and she gets gorgeous and she comes in with some music fabrics.
Can you all hear us all okay?
Having a little trouble.
I wanted to say something about hybrid. I think some of the, if you go to, if you want to go to,
Make sure it's on.
yes, of course. Is there an on switch?
I think we're getting a little bit of, oh,
Can
we're
you
getting
hear
some
me
help.
now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yes, you can. Oh, nice house. If you want to see some really good cosplay, if you're just getting into this is not for the veterans. I want you to look at the parade that they have at Dragon Con, because that is absolutely full of the most amazing costumes. I think my favorite last time, they had somebody dressed up as the Black Panther, but done in black as if he was from, what is
Wakanda.
Black Panther movie?
Wakanda.
Yeah, what we were Wakanda, but it was Pink Panther.
Okay.
And they have a lot of those hybrids. They also have people that do very accurate characters and just, they'll do nothing but pose and rightly so because it's really worth seeing. So if you go to Dragon Con online, you can look for photos of their parade. This is marvelous examples.
One thing someone mentioned when I brought this subject up at MarsCon was they said, ooh, I want to see a jacket. I forget what kind they said, but like a biker jacket, something like that, with an Elizabethan collar and an Elizabethan ruff attached to it. So like a 2000 jacket, you know, even like maybe an 1980s, the members only jacket. Can you imagine one of those with like an Elizabethan ruff attached to it? Like something like that would be tremendous
That's a
fun
hybrid.
to see, the hybrids, yes. And personally, a costume I want to make myself, a hybrid would be, I want to make like the bodice and skirt that they would have been wearing in the 1630s, and then get a t-shirt for the Huskies, the local football team from Mannington, and wear the Huskies shirt and sneakers with it. I might even go like, because our sneakers, as I mentioned yesterday, sneaker styles have changed since then, but there are some that are eternal. Keds are eternal, and Chucks are eternal. So, maybe a pair of
The
like
eternal sneaker, they have not changed since 1929. There's a regular model of cat.
So, a high school's booster t-shirt, some high top Chucks, and otherwise 17th century clothing, I think would be a tremendously fun cosplay. Yes?
Well, when you said that, I know that in, I think, the 19th century at least, they had knitting machines that did stockings, because I've seen a demo of them, these little tiny, tiny hooks. Would they have, and I would hope that maybe one knitting machine came back.
The first one was available in England in the reign of Elizabeth I.
Have they been able to extrapolate to a flat, like for a t-shirt?
I don't know.
I don't think they have yet. I know there's one of my stories I brought in tulle, so they're doing net and tulle kind of knitting, but it's still very limited quantities in that. And to be perfectly honest, it'll be a while before the tulle goes much of anywhere other than ballet. But they're probably doing other kinds of knitting and sewing
Because I would
machines.
think that the thread would be an issue too.
But the
Has to be very
The
dependent.
real new thing that they introduced for 1632 was crochet,
Oh, yes, I remember that story.
because that was not known yet. Yet it can be done totally with a hook, and you can now control it through a guild, because anybody can have somebody with a little crochet hook, and you can violate more sumptuary laws than there were on the books if you just crochet.
We have a,
It's important to do something historically accurate. If you're going to do a hybrid, you need an accurate jumping off point. I'll give you an example. My stepdaughter made me this most amazing kimono. It has all the little ties and the turns and the O-beams. You have to tie it yourself just so. And she knows all of the details because there's a lot of research on it. And there's some trial and error learning how to do some of these things. But once you have a period down, you play with it. It's like learning how to write, and then learning when you to break the rules. You need to know how to make the costume period before you know how to.
one other thing that's starting to be an issue is, like, I grabbed this t-shirt, and some of the people, Bernadette Szymanski, I believe in particular, grew up in Blacksburg, so she'd be a Hokie. And her parents worked there, her sister went there. Virginia Tech t-shirt would be perfectly appropriate for her. But I was looking at this and I was like, but would they have made one that looked like that in 2000? Right? And I felt like this one was okay, it's just a script. But I have another VT t-shirt, and I felt like that was a style that's more recent. So some of the things you have to think at this point, because it's been 25 years, is this something that would have been in 2000, right? And yesterday I was talking and I wore a Totoro t-shirt with my pants. And would I put Totoro in canon? No, I would not, because it's too specific. It was in Japan at the time. I don't think it had been released in this country, or if it had, it had just been released. It's just kind of sketchy to put it in canon. But having it as a t-shirt for cosplay, I know it was released in Japan. Someone could have had, a friend send them a t-shirt, they got it at the Will store, or whatever, it's possible. So there's a little more latitude to play with something if you're doing a cosplay. And, you can give some kind of a justification for it. Well, someone mailed it to them, they had a friend that was stationed in Japan and sent it to them, whatever. There's a lot more latitude for making it up on a cosplay.
I find cosplay to be an extension of identifying with the character when you read them or you watch a movie. You want to be that person, and this is your way of being more a part of that world.
And
It's a way of bringing in new fans.
There are some things that are commercially available that are perfect for cosplay. In 2007, my daughter-in-law and I spent some time at the Textile Museum in Colmar, looking at things, and among the things that they had up at that point were displays of men's padded vests from the 16th through the 20th century. And essentially, you could take a man's sleeveless padded vest from 1620 and a skier's man's sleeveless padded vest from 2000, and the differences were the fabric and the zipper. The older one had buttons and was a synthetic and was a natural fabric. The newer one had a zipper and was a synthetic fabric, but for cosplay, it would have worked fine, particularly since we have zippers as an important new fashion accessory in the 1632 world. Dr. Rippleflotz has 16 zippers on his jacket simply because he regards them as ornamental.
Yes, okay. These are some things I brought to show and tell a little bit that I found. Okay, this is a dress that I think would work well for a cosplay. Ties in the back. You can modify it. It has sewing in the middle. There's some seed beads and embroidery. And I got this at Goodwill. I'm going to go see a little closer. And it's a linen rayon blend. Obviously, they wouldn't have had rayon, but I got this at Goodwill for about $10. Might have been 15. Probably because a bunch of the seed beads have fallen off and they didn't want to deal with it any further. But I think this would be a good base for cosplay. You can do things like, one of the things what I really want to do with this one is the whole skirt. I want to put something machine embroidered because I'm not crazy. Vote FOJP, 4th of July party. I want to embroider that like all over the skirt so that it's like a walking advertisement, like they like mimicking the t-shirts. So it would be a higher end version of mimicking the t-shirts. Or I might do a cheaper just painting on kind of effect for something faster to do. So it's taking something. Screen printing, exactly, thank you.
You can also use fabric paints.
One of the other things is, we came back from the year 2000, we have quite a few older women, so they would have probably had some things left in their closet from when they were teenagers, like so many of us do from when we were younger. And so these older sweaters, which this has a collar that buttons off, which would have been popular in the time and common, but there's the embroidery and there's sequins, and some of the patterns from like the sweaters and the material things from the 1950s and 60s that were stuck in their closet would have been, I think, good inspiration. They wouldn't obviously have had necessarily the beads or the sequins or things, but the embroidery patterns. I found this fabric. It could not be a more 80s looking pattern. Like, it's not humanly possible to be more 80s looking than this pattern.
Imitation.
Yeah, so, you can just go with doing something that is an older style or a style in the alternate history and using a modern fabric for it, right? Like this skirt this fabric is a rayon blend. It would not have been around then. We look at it and it's a dark pattern, but for them it was probably, first of all, this level of black would have been super expensive. And the colors in it. So for them it would have been very expensive and hard to find fabric. And then the last thing I'm going to show you before I hand it over is this is recent, clearly 50th anniversary, but it's inspired by the older style baseball jackets.
Yes.
So you can have something as simple as, a baseball style jacket that instead of, maybe they have a cape and they modify it with the kind of sleeves that you would have on a baseball jacket. or to make a jacket instead, something like that.
I want to encourage you to look at museums. Some museums actually have displays of older costumes. Most recently, I was at the Prohibition Museum in Savannah, Georgia, and they had all these flapper costumes. They also had kind of the wax works of people, of various people from Prohibition, everything from Billy Sunday to Al Capone. And each one of them was wearing a historically accurate costume. A lot of museums will have historically accurate costumes, very often under glass in a place where it won't cause the fabric to deteriorate. And you don't necessarily have to go, you can see them online, they're usually pictures, so that's how you choose your destination. But I encourage you to go and see them in person so that you can see the detail work.
And also, you think about, for 1632, what would likely have been in Manning. In the scene where the uptight Eric Pott introduces himself to Catherine Riddle, who is standing there being miserable at a social event after they have made their alliance with Gustav, Derek wanders up to Kat and says, looking at her clothing, "Let me guess, bridesmaid's dress." Because the 1980s, 1990s Princess Diana floof would have been of Baroque appeal in the 17th century. And undoubtedly, every one of those has come out of the closet. Similarly, when they're planning to find a wedding dress for Dina, Pastor Kastenmeyer's daughter, a half dozen of the local women haul out their boxed wedding dresses to see what they can make for her. So there will be a lot around, one way or the other, which leads us, of course, to Bethanne's headdress.
But tiaras, I don't care what you say, if you're female, you pretty much like tiaras, you may not want to admit it, you don't probably have a reason to use them in life. Tiaras are awesome. That's why if you go to a con, you see lots of people just randomly wearing them like I am right now. I will say, Bjorn has been following up on my comments too previously about tiaras. He's been looking at them in Mannington, and this would actually be really inaccurate for Mannington because their tiaras are like this tall and massive. They have, I don't know what the status was in 2000, but now in 2024, they have at least 6 to 8 different fair queens, and they have really big tiaras, like crowns, really, they're large and impressive. And there will definitely be more than a couple of them left in town. And we haven't obviously seen anything about pageants or tiaras from uptimers in canon, but one of my stories I'm working on, I am bringing up the Mannington Fair, which is a real thing. And so the Granville Fair will happen in 1631. It's not going to happen because they're kind of, trying to stay alive. And then in 1632, they'll have a very small one because it'll start in the high school. The girls want the tiara, and the boys want to check out the girls. So they're going to have the Mannington Fair start coming back. It'll start very small, and it'll be a real thing again by sometime around 35 or 36. So I'm bringing back the tiara because I like tiaras.
And the only way men can get away with that is if they're hanging out with a woman who's wearing a tiara and they get to be king.
Yes. And keep in mind, again, when you're designing your 1632 costume, Eric blithely ignored it in his discussion of the cheerleaders and their short skirts. But they're living in the middle of this little ice age, which means that the residents of Granville will have gone to warmer clothing than they were accustomed to wearing. I will give you a just brief quote from Martin Luther in his table talk when he was discussing being a pastor with his theology students. He said, "It's a waste of breath to preach about modesty. Everybody in your parish will be covered in 5 layers of padded quilted fabric from their neck to their toes and wearing a hat."
When I'm talking about the outfits, the uniforms for medical downtimers, I specify that there's a skirt and tops that the women wear, and then there's a pants and jacket, tunic type top that the men and the women wear, because the women wear the pants under their skirt as another layer, and they wear the jacket on top of their shirt as another layer. So they're just adding a second layer on. So that's because of the Ice Age. So that's going to be a common thing, no matter what you're doing, is get lots of extra clothing.
Danita Ewing and I talked about the scrubs very early on, and she was a nurse, of course, and she thought it would be so sharp, quote unquote, if she could have the scrubs in Lee Center be navy blue. And I said, too expensive for things that are going to be washed all the time. You can get a kind of medium slate blue out of the local woad that's grown up around Hereford, and that's going to have to be as far as you go, and you're going to have to count on having it fade until the new dyes from La Florian become cheap enough to use for something as frequently worn and worn out as scrubs.
Outside of Leahy, it's acknowledged in there that Leahy and to some extent Yano wear the scrubs, and it's a very distinctive them thing. Everyone else, it's based on what was historically worn, the Lady in the Lamp story. A lot of it's based out of that Scholastic book specifically because they had it in town. And they wore those to be more practical. One thing I added and changed, my shoes I'm wearing, they're espadrilles. And these are cheap, I think fishermen used to wear them. It's a woven, like twine almost bottom.
Yes, it's usually made with twine iron. You can actually, you weave those kind of shoes out of twine on a piece of wood that has nails in it in a particular pattern.
Yeah, cavemen wore espadrilles.
So these are specifically the shoes, I specifically said they would wear these, especially in areas like the operating room, where they would get blood on them and things, because then you can throw the shoes in the laundry and wash them. And in the operating room, they might wear a leather overshoe in case they drop something sharp for protection, but the shoe itself is going to be an espadrille that's thrown in, they can be thrown in the laundry. And I will probably bring them up other places, but if you're doing 1632 cosplay, any kind of an espadrille, go for it. They're in canon, they exist. If they're brown, just so you know, the color is Brillo brown. It's in canon.
Looking for a suggestion here for the safety issue. If you're going to have espadrilles like that in the opera room, and you think you're going to drop sharp stuff, put in a steel toe.
Steel's too expensive.
Not in 1635.
Well, steel, hold on, let's stop for a minute. Steel is expensive, however, we're talking about very limited amount of use, and I have already specified overshoes exist. So you can have an overshoe that exists with a steel toe so that it's not integral to the shoe. I don't know, let's not go into manufacturing on this any further, but you can have something like that you add, whether it's in an operating room or an industrial environment where you have an overshoe that has a steel toe that people can use. It's more protection than they have with what is otherwise available in the timeline, and that more than one person can use.
That is a real thing.
But related to the espadrille, the Russians would have worn bast shoes out in here, which are basically espadrille with laces. So, and if you're doing a Russian thing, that would be that. And if you want
That's Gorg.
a sexy tiara, you can go for a costume. And those are fun.
Another sort of technical question.
I don't know how far out that's gonna be, honestly. We can look into the latex from dandelions and see what might be possible from those.
Because I'm just really into like, they're gonna want comfortable underwear. Downtimers are not gonna want to be doing.
You know, and that's it. There's a book I have actually on, that I didn't bring it this weekend, but there's a book on swimsuits and it shows smocking from the 1950s and how they used that for swimsuits to create some stretch. So I think I can see them doing something that's smocked sooner
Agreed.
probably than latex. So, I mean, as weird as it sounds and as weird as like thinking about it, I'm like, okay, like that feels weird. But they can do like smocked underwear. And, you know, maybe I'll write something, and that's a good one. But
And same thing for clothes,
I have a story that a company I created in one of my stories, and we haven't talked about the businesses that exist, but I created Flannery's Fashions, which does sewing based out of Grantville, and then there's Juniors, which is another business with them that is more focused on the younger market, and I also did Irene's Intimates, which is specifically because they're going to create bras, and more specifically because they hate underwires, and they need to be left in the dustbin of history, and not even in the dustbin of history, because someone might find them there, but like completely excised, so no one remembers they exist. There's actually like, I have like 2 pages of them ranting about how evil underwires are, and that they need to go away, but that's why that's there, because they need to develop.
And one more thing I was thinking, the downtimers would be anti-whale bones for horses. You know, I think they would be, you know, like, they would be into what's like not deplete the whale population, I think would be something. So
The
they would
uptimers
do something
would be.
other than whale bone for horses, I think.
The uptimers would be, and I'm sure they can figure out something. Yeah, it did. I don't remember, do you know the bodies they made at the time that they were made?
It depended on how much money you were willing to spend. If you were a peasant woman, you probably stiffened your bodice with straw, which could be pulled out, because in the average barn, there was a great deal of straw, and when you needed to wash it, you pulled the straw out first, you washed your corset, you put some more straw in it, and it meant that, you know, it was reasonably flexible. You could bend and you could move. Slightly more expensive would be very thin, fine strips of wood, which they slid down into those openings. So by the time you get into the category of bone stiffening, it's for women who didn't have to bend over.
Oh, yeah.
They were on display. You have to think, you know, how many of us have ever in our lives donned an outfit that would be found on the red carpet at the annual Met Gala? Those big, showy photographs of queens and noblewomen are at that level of couture, of which 99% of the population would have admired from a distance, but
They're not
would
practical.
I ever, even if I was 19, have put on the kind of thing in which the Kardashians appear in public? No.
But, and like, people will talk about how, like, corsets keep you from moving and they destroy your waist and all of those. And saying everyone wears a corset is like saying everyone wears stilettos all the time, every day. No, they don't. There's, like, even women like the Princess of Wales, who's frequently seen wearing stilettos, doesn't wear them all the time for every event, right? There are some women that I think would get on a boat to go out for, you know, like sailing, where they actually have to sail the boat, and still wear the stilettos, and you're just like, right? When you see those people, they're like, you have no common sense. Those are the same kind of women that would have been wearing the corset.
You
that
wear
destroys
one of
your waist.
those all day, and you're going to be sore for 3 days afterwards, is what my girlfriend's telling me.
Yeah, you know, I own stilettos. Do I wear them? Sometimes, but my general rule is if I have to have my shoes on for more than 20 minutes in the entire time, I don't wear them. Like, I wear them into the restaurant, I take them off for dinner, I wear them back out to the car. That's it, right? Because, like, they're pretty, you know, I will admit it. own them now. So I got them on a really good sale. And my kids always laugh at me because I'm like, how many things do you get because they're on a really good sale? More than 90%, you know? So
I was just, this is much louder. My stepdaughter would do things for the Revolutionary War period, which had a lot of similar things to the 17th universe. And she was big on drawstrings, she was big on cotton fabrics, which were something you could grow here. She also would do a little bit of wool, and she was big on linen. Those are the fabrics and leather that you have to work with, and maybe with a little fur trim for those that have a lot of money and it's winter. But you are not going to find stretch fabrics that far back. You're going to find gathering, you're going to find smocking, you're going to find something that is able to be moved around in because it pulls to a point and you can adjust that point.
Has there ever been a 1632 story about someone throwing paint on someone wearing fur?
no.
That would be a good one.
I don't think they're that loud because we're talking about West Virginians who do a lot of hunting and relied on it for their actual food, right? They weren't hunting for entertainment, so they're not going to be your PETA anti-hunter, anti...
Somebody might come visiting who's an obvious outsider with some of these things though. But the everyday person is going to be wearing something extremely practical.
I actually have a line in one of my stories where they're doing something and they're like, that's expensive polyester! That's not some cheap fabric like linen.
And also, you need to keep in mind that a lot of the clothes that everyday people wore were hand-me-downs or second-hand. In the 16th and 17th century clothing duke the other day, a woman put up a Dutch genre painting showing a couple of teenage boys with musical instruments busking on a street corner. And she's fretting that the fit of one of the boys' jerkins on the shoulder isn't what she had learned in class was the proper way to fit a jerkin to a man's shoulder. And I let this go on for a while, and I said, these are teenage boys. His mother got him something that would give him room to grow for a year or two. And if you are thinking fit, please think of the modern equivalent of an old sweatshirt and a pair of baggy basketball shorts. These boys were not dressed to show off. They were dressed to sit on a street corner and play their musical instrument.
Wouldn't cotton be an import for in this time period? I would have thought it's mostly India, Egypt.
It's still an import. Your cheap fabric was fustian, which was a mix of linen and wool.
Right.
Lindsay Woolsey, they call it.
Actually, they called it fustian. It was called Lindsay Woolsey in England. But
Yeah, so that depends on the geography. So yeah, and she's talking North America, Revolutionary era. So
Okay, I just wanted to get some clarity.
What I'd like to emphasize is they reused everything. So you might have a sleeve that is detachable because the kid's growing, and then you put a different sleeve on the shirt. It's everything is reused because their economy is really based on using everything you have.
it's a world in which things are expensive and labor is comparatively cheap, as compared to the post-industrial society where things are cheap and labor is comparatively expensive. Everything really got reused. Everything still got reused in the Depression. Use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without.
We're almost out of time, so I have two things. One is that If you don't have a sewing machine, you don't have an embroidery machine, you can't do a lot of these things. There are maker spaces. Look for them. I used them once in our local libraries. I have something here that I made right before this at our local maker space. And you probably can't see it on the camera. What this is a dog tag. I made a dog tag for a character that to cosplay. And it's a Vietnam, using the standard format for the Vietnam era because she was born in 1939.
You use a metal stamp?
I used the glow forge, which engraves metal.
Okay.
And so I made up a blood type for her, and it says she's Methodist after marriage, right? So I just gave her a generic faith of Christian, and we actually have numbers in the grid for each character, and so instead of her social security number, I have her grid number and the year she was born to make up a social number for her. So you can do things like that that are just fun little details that no one will ever know. No one's, I mean, I can't imagine her blood type is gonna come up, but you know, maybe I'll throw it into a story. But you can do things like that at a makerspace that are a lot of fun. They also have embroidery machines, sewing machines, 3D
Surge
printers,
machines.
surge machines, 3D printers. So if you want to 3D print something to help you with a costume, you can probably do it if not your local county, check other counties that are associated with you and they may have them.
And if you know somebody that has a maker butt, you can have them make accessories.
Yes.
They may not be the right material, they'll probably be made out of plastic, but you can make something that would work with the outfit.
I'm making Bjorn come up here because he's doing cosplaying as Ness. So Bjorn, just stand there and show off, walk, turn. There you go. So there's a guy costume as Ness. So it doesn't have to be something terribly elaborate. When you think 1630s costumes, a lot of times people will think this is going to be really elaborate, really difficult to do, really challenging. I mean, I showed you at the beginning of this, the pattern I used that rivals a pillowcase. I mean, you can wear that as a very, very simple costume. You can do the neckerchief and tam sort of clothing that Bjorn has on. You can do, you know, combine camouflage and something like Virginia mentioned, the vest. There's no reason someone couldn't have taken their 17th century vest and added a zipper. You can do things like that and say, okay, this is my alternate history cosplay.
Questions?
I live in Stanton, and the makerspace in my town is actually independent of the library, so just look it up, you know, research it. And there is a section they've got a lot of fabric arts stuff there that people are very, very involved in, so that may be a group of like-minded people as well that might be able to tap into.
And local sewing, if you can find a local sewing machine repair place, they may do stuff. Our local sewing repair place.
My husband actually does some machine repairs, surge machine repairs, including if you have embroidery and software and all that. We live in the Columbia, South Carolina area though, so I don't know how helpful that will be to you.
But one of the things they just showed is there's kits you can buy to make your own sneakers. And so I think that's going to be something I will check out a little bit more, to have people make their own sneakers. And what I will probably end up is that they make sort of an espadrille kind of base and just dip it in some kind of a latex or resin for the outside. And that will be their sneaker. But are there any additional questions?
Amber, you wrote one time that,
I'm not hearing you.
I said, you wrote one time that Emma in that period didn't necessarily reach the floor. I wonder when the wood there would a shorter working story.
Well, if you look at pictures of working women, and I don't mean prostitutes, I mean women who had jobs in Venice at the time, their skirts basically came to 2 or 3 inches below the knee. That was unusually high, but remember, Venice is prone to flooding, and nobody wanted to be trekking through the streets of Venice with 12 inches of wet fabric flopping around their ankles. Then they wore stockings and they wore wooden clogs. The Netherlands used a lot of wooden clogs. In the Germanies, you usually see the skirts down to about here,
Right.
except for the migrant agricultural laborers out of Switzerland who went up and down from Switzerland off into Austria, all the way up to northern France. And they wore their skirts just at knee length because they were out in the fields among the grain. And it's really very uncomfortable to walk through a field and spend the rest of your day with stick tights on the inside of your skirt scratching your legs. So basically, they kept them up above the stubble.
I have a 1630 question. They used gunpowder. I'm a retired safety engineer, and I want to know what would cause sparks. You have to wear spark-proof shoes nowadays, because I'm actually familiar with the ocean inspectors who went into a fireworks factory and blew up and somebody made sparks with their footwear. Is there anything that they would wear that could cause sparks that they need to avoid with their footwear?
Well, they don't want to add metal to their footwear, but the essential footwear was a combination of wood, leather, hemp ties. There wasn't much there that would cause.
Static electricity? No?
Well, yes, we have a nice static electricity explosion in Frankfurt at one point, but we're not going to be focusing on this. They're used to using gunpowder, and this is one of the passing hazards of their life.
Okay, I have one last question.
They
One
use
thing you,
felt. They use felt.
Well, the Royal Navy.
At what point?
okay, I'm gonna say one last thing before we end, which is, this is sort of, this hasn't been stated clearly, but it's sort of in subtext, which is, we're used to things that you put on and you like button and it's in one spot, and you gain 10 pounds, you lose 10 pounds, your clothing stops fitting, and you need something new. That's not how they're going to approach it. If you look at the split skirts I have, I can gain or lose probably 20 pounds easily, and I can still wear the same thing.
Because they're gathered.
They're gathered, they're tied, they're laced. There are things that you can adjust the size. So that's something else to keep in mind that will make your clothing more appropriate to the area. And also, you know, we don't wear cosplays that often. If you wear it, you can wear it for more years. And it'll just be a little easier on you. And if you know, you have a big lunch, then, you know, you're
You don't
still
have to
comfortable at
loosen
the
your
end of the
belt,
day.
you just loosen the ties.
Okay, and so thank you all for coming. It's 12:55, so everyone, next
You've
group's
been a
going on.
marvelous
Thank
audience.
you.